the Indian economy was suddenly knocked off its high perch in Q3 of 2024. As the year ends and India looks expectantly at 2025, the Prime Minister called for a meeting of economic advisors and planners in the government. The Prime Minister asked his team to get India's GDP growth back above the 7% mark. The budget survey later in the month will give us an idea if this is possible. Initial feedback given to the Prime Minister suggests that Q3 fall was perhaps an out-of-character blip. Is this really so? And what needs to be done to get back to 7% plus GDP growth and even beyond, viewers? There are some statistics that I just want to very quickly go over, and they'll come up on your screens. As of today, viewers, we are in Q4 of this particular year and a shock GDP of 5.48%. The source is MOSPI or MOSPI data, viewers. Then you have broad indications of other patterns, viewers. And these patterns are very, very interesting, because if you look at the top line of the economy, you come across 104% rise in the last 10 years of forex reserves, GST collection again at a high. Sometimes you could say that, look, these collections weren't expected to be where they are, but today, viewers, they are at a very, very satisfying number. Unemployment rate, again, viewers, if you go by the periodic labor force survey by MOSPI, it's about 3.24%. We can argue about those numbers. Some people say that it's higher. But fundamentally, viewers, the All India consumption trend data is also out, and there seems to be a narrowing in consumption between rural and urban India. There is stress. I'm not saying there isn't stress. There's more money being spent on food, which could also signal sort of higher rates of inflation that people are feeling, and therefore food inflation being particularly on the higher side. So let's open this up, viewers, for an informed conversation. We are lucky to have with us Rajiv Kumar, economist and former VC of the Niti Aayog, no less, and Dr. K.V. Subramanian, Executive Director, IMF, and former CA of the Government of India. Two very distinguished individuals. I thank you both for appearing together. It's not very often that you get two big names like this sharing television space. So I'm doubly honored, and our viewers would surely delight in this interaction. Rajiv Kumarji, my first question to you, sir. How do you perceive this slight blip that we saw, 5.48%? Is this something that is going to sort of occupy the mind space going ahead? Are we going to get back to 7% plus or maybe even more? What is your assessment, sir?
Hi, Rahul. Great to be on this program, as always, with you. Hi, Subbu. How are you? Doing well there. Rahul, on your question, I think 5.4% is a blip. It's not something that will continue. The Indian economy is most likely going to be bounce back to above 6% in the second half of this fiscal year. That's and probably go about 6% or so. But I'm a worried man. Most parts is that it will not go up to 7, as you said, as easily. And 6% is good, but not good enough in my view. And therefore, but at the same time, one must tell oneself that in a world which is where the economy is getting more fragmented, where their protectionist tendencies are on the rise, where world trade growth is getting to be slower than the GDP growth, it's not going to be easy for any economy to do 6% plus. But, and this is a big but, that for ourselves, for our aspirations, for our objectives, we need to go to that 7%, and that's something that is an imperative for India to realize its own objectives and its own aspirations, as it were. But 5.4% coming back is not a trend figure, and it's something that will soon be forgotten when the Q3 and Q4 numbers come out in due course.
But you do say that getting back to 7% looks very, very tough. Now, why is that, Mr. Kumar? Why is that? Because, Dr. Subramanian, and he's written this brilliant book, India at 100, where he's projecting some big things. But those are all predicated on larger growth rates, which, according to you, may not be a reality for the next few years. Then what happens?
Yeah, I think, Rahul, my major worry is the performance of the private investment. Let's remember that in India, the main driver of growth has always been private sector investment and private sector growth. Public sector expenditure, public capex, which has risen very smartly to 1 trillion rupees, etc., can substitute for a while. But the real driver of growth has to be private investment, and private investment has remained shy. And there are now recent reports. Yesterday, there were articles and a lot of social media saying that a lot of HNIs are leaving India, to be registered in Dubai and Singapore, etc. That's also a cause of worry. Why am I raising that? Is that I think the ecosystem to promote private investment, the ecosystem where the government appears to be in the service of the private investor, where the government is promoting and encouraging private investment and not acting as its as a sort of block, as it were, is not yet in place in my view. In short, otherwise, the ease of doing business in India, at the ground level, where in the states or in various places around the country, is not as it can be or as it should be, especially for the small and medium enterprises. Which is why these small and medium enterprises remain small. They are unable to take part in the global supply chains and production networks. And that weakness of the private investor, finding that he is constantly confronted with the number of if you like, the short word is blockages, as it were, by the government system, makes it shy of investing. The second part, of course, is related, is that the private investment will come when capacity utilizations improve markedly, and that will happen when consumption demand goes up. And in the last few quarters, we have seen consumption demand being weak, and as a result of that, the private investor is not enthused for spending, and that also shows up in the credit figures from the banks, that the personal credit numbers are rising while the credit to industry has not been doing as well as it can be. So those are my major concern is what is happening to the private investor and private investment and private sector growth.
Okay, and of course, many people are also sort of saying that credit offtake for industry has been low simply because the interest rates are high. There's that little sideshow that is also taking place. But let me bring in Dr. Subramanian. Doctor, look, those numbers that you projected into the future are contingent upon vigorous growth. Let's be honest about that. I've gone through most of your book, and I think Rajiv ji is sort of trying to tell us that, look, the ecosystem to generate this, to draw out this private investment is not there. Now, would you agree with this thesis? And if so, then what needs to be done in specific terms?
Very good evening, Rahul. Very good evening, Rajiv ji, and viewers as well. Rahul, I think we must acknowledge that, like the Indian cricket team needs reforms, the Indian economy needs reforms as well. India needs to grow at 8%. That is the potential that the Indian economy has. And for that, reforms are really critical. Rajiv ji very rightly brought in the ease of doing business. I think this is an aspect that particularly impacts the smaller firms. And, I think there is a lot of inputs that keep coming to me. Many people keep sending their inputs, and smaller firms are particularly hurting because of some of the difficulties, created by GST and overall tax. I think the emphasis on tax, and the difficulties it creates for ease of doing business is something that must be acknowledged, both on the GST side and on income tax. And I think at the same time, we must also focus on reforms, especially at the state level. And this is an aspect that, in my book tour, Rahul, I have been emphasizing that, India is a federal polity, and therefore many subjects are under the jurisdiction of states. Yet, whether it is the media, whether it is the industry associations like CII, FICCI, ASSOCHAM, none of us really put the spotlight on state reforms. Rahul, when was the last time you remember, a Maharashtra budget or a Gujarat budget or a Andhra Pradesh budget or Tamil Nadu budget being actually examined with the same attention that the federal budget actually the union government's budget is focused on. I was part of 4 budgets, and we all used to go and explain the logic behind that to the media and to the industry associations, yet there is absolutely no focus. I'll just take one example to highlight. We talk about manufacturing. When it comes to manufacturing, a manufacturing firm needs 6 inputs. Those are land, labor, capital, power, logistics, and ease of doing business. Of this, except for capital, 5 other inputs are states' jurisdictions. And yet, are we asking the question of state chief ministers, state finance ministers, what are they doing for land, to ease purchase of land? What are they doing on labor? What are they doing on power? What are they doing to improve logistics? What are they doing on ease of doing business? A lot of ease of doing business is at the state level. What are we doing to actually reform the bureaucracy? I think this is something that is really critical as well. These are questions that we must be asking. And I say once again, like the Indian team needs reforms, the Indian economy needs reforms as well.
Okay, this is very interesting because viewers, when he's talking about the states, we'll be talking in just a few moments about the state of Delhi, which is going for elections. And here in Delhi, there will be this sort of big, expansive reverie rollout that many people are saying could endanger, in fact, the health of the Delhi economy. But we'll come to that in just a few moments. I just want to quickly press you on this, Dr. Saab, and this is a fundamental question. If we know the problems, why is the government dragging its feet? Most of the major states today are with the BJP.
I think, Rahul, when it comes to states, it is the case that none of the constituents, whether it's the fourth estate, the media, whether it is the industry bodies or the citizens, none of us even put any, pressure or, of expectations on state governments. As I'm mentioning earlier as well, when was the last time you actually read
what
an
about the
article
government? Some of these issues, the larger reforms program. I mean, look, many people say already that the Prime Minister, for example, is a great visionary, but is he actually a committed reformer? That is something that, he performs brilliantly within the ambit, but is he a reformer? And that's the question that will constantly be asked of him.
No, in the 3 years that I had the privilege of working with him, there were many reforms that were done, and I think the Honorable Prime Minister is somebody who's committed to reform.
Right.
But at the same time, in a democratic polity, you have to acknowledge that, that states basically need to be doing the reforms. And I think it is now for all of us to actually put that focus. When the next time the Maharashtra budget is presented or the Gujarat budget, all of us need to start asking the questions. And I'll tell you, this is an important nuance that must be remembered, Rahul, that compared to actually the union government, state governments, if you think about it, actually, do not face as much pressure, and actually they can do reform because there isn't as much media spotlight. They
Right.
can do reforms. I think the political will to do reforms at the state level must be mustered. I think that is really critical because even if you think about aspects of climate change, ease of living, etc., states, I think, really have to start delivering across the
Okay, well, viewers, we've heard the exposition of the problem, and we're also now being guided into thinking a little harder about how to take it on. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.